I was standing in the aisle at Mariano's with a frozen pecan pie in my hand when my son said, "Dad, we're not expecting you for Christmas." The words hit like sleet against a windshield, cold, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I'm Mark Holloway, 56, a general contractor who's spent more time building other people's dreams than protecting my own. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stared at the pie, remembering how Ethan used to sneak pecans from the bowl when he was 8, his sticky fingers leaving prints on Leah's recipe cards. "What do you mean, not expecting me?" I asked, shifting the phone to my other ear. Through the speaker, I could hear Kelsey's voice in the background, something about place settings in her mother's dining room in Lake Forest. "It's just tight this year," Ethan said, his voice carrying that careful tone he'd perfected as an accountant. "Kelsey's family is hosting, and you know how Valerie gets about numbers. Maybe we can do something New Year's? Just the three of us?" Just the three of us. Like I was an afterthought to be squeezed in later, after the real family had finished their real celebration. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I'm standing here in Naperville, Illinois on November 15th, 2024, and I can tell you that sometimes the most devastating betrayals come wrapped in politeness. Ethan thanked me for everything I'd done past tense, like he was filing away a completed transaction. The gratitude felt like a receipt being folded and tucked into a drawer. I looked down at my cart. Cranberries, stuffing mix, a jar of gravy sitting there like a white flag of surrender. All the makings of a feast for a table that apparently had no room for the man who'd been quietly paying for the house where it would be served. The drive home took me past downtown Naperville, where crews were already hanging lights for the winter festival. Families moved like schools of fish along the sidewalks, bundled against the November chill, and I felt the familiar ache that had lived in my chest since Leah passed 3 years ago. She would have known what to say. She would have asked the right questions. My house still smelled like cedar from the shelving I'd built after the funeral, projects to fill the silence, tasks to make the emptiness feel purposeful. On the kitchen counter, underneath a flyer advertising the Winter Lights Parade downtown Naperville December 7th, sat a crumpled piece of mail that suddenly felt like evidence. A mortgage statement for 1247 Blue Spruce Lane dated December 1st, 2024. The amount due $2,847. That bill belonged to my son's dream house, the colonial with the wraparound porch and the kitchen island where Kelsey staged her real estate photos. But the payment that came from my account had been coming from my account every month since November 2022, when I'd quietly set up the auto debit to help them breathe during their first years of homeownership. I scrolled through my text messages, looking for clues I'd missed. In September, I'd wired them $18,500 for renovations. Kelsey had sent me photos of granite samples and paint swatches, materials I could never taste or touch, improvements to a house I was apparently no longer welcome to visit. The spare key to their place had arrived back in my mailbox on November 10th, sealed in a manila envelope with my name written in Kelsey's careful script. No note, no explanation, just my own key, returned like library property. At 8:14 that evening, I found myself scrolling through old voice memos on my phone, a habit I'd developed since Leah's death, playing back fragments of conversations I'd recorded for work, but that had captured her voice in the background. There she was, from 2 years ago, discussing the house purchase. "If you help him with a house, Mark, make sure the table is long enough for all of us." The table had shrunk. I sat in my workshop that night, surrounded by half-finished projects and the ghost of sawdust, staring at that mortgage bill. Every receipt was my pension. This house was supposed to be my retirement, my security, built on the promise that family meant shared tables and open doors. Instead, I was learning that love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's enabling. And I was about to find out exactly how much enabling costs when you add up the numbers in black and white. The next morning, I decided not to fight my feelings. Not yet. Instead, I started doing what contractors do when something isn't level. I began reading the numbers, checking the foundation, and preparing to see just how much weight this structure could actually bear. Because sometimes the only way to fix a relationship is to first figure out exactly how broken it really is. Grief doesn't knock, it sits at your table and eats off your plate. On November 16th, I avoided the Blue Spruce neighborhood like a guilty man avoids his church. I drove the long way to the hardware store, took Route 59 instead of cutting through their subdivision, because I wasn't ready to see the house I'd helped them buy standing there like a monument to my own foolishness. That evening, I cooked for one, a ritual that had become as familiar as breathing since Leah passed. The oven timer dinged to an empty room, and I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts spread out like evidence at a crime scene. $2,847. Every month since November 2022, 25 months of payments, adding up to $71,175 of my retirement fund, flowing silently into their dream, while I ate reheated leftovers in a house that echoed with memories. I pulled out the HOA assessment notice that had arrived last week. $3,200 for emergency roof repairs on their building. Pending, it said. Unpaid. While I was covering their mortgage, they couldn't even handle the basic maintenance of the property I was keeping afloat. But it was the yellow post-it note that made my hands shake. Leah's handwriting, stuck to the original mortgage paperwork. Make sure he refinances by 2030. The balloon clause, $699,842 due in full in 2035. She'd flagged it because she knew. She always knew when the math didn't add up. I replayed the September barbecue in my head, frame by frame like a contractor reviewing blueprints for flaws. Kelsey's mother, Valerie, had arrived with her silver BMW and her Lake Forest attitude, surveying their backyard like she was calculating square footage. "We'll take it from here," she'd said. When I offered to help with the grilling, her voice carrying the dismissive tone of someone instructing a contractor to pack up his tools. The silence at their dining table that night had felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced the conversation without me. When the check came, $148.62 for dinner at some farm-to-table place Kelsey had chosen, Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. I'd covered it, my hand shaking as I signed the receipt, feeling like I was paying for the privilege of being tolerated. On November 19th, I found myself in the back pew at St. Raphael's, where Leah's memorial card was still tucked inside hymnal number 214. I wasn't praying. I was calculating every receipt was my pension. This house was supposed to be my retirement. Instead, it had become a sinkhole that was swallowing my future while my son planned Christmas dinners that didn't include the man financing his mortgage. The church was empty except for Mrs. Chen, who came every Monday to light candles for her late husband. She nodded at me, her face kind and weathered, and I wondered if she could see the grief radiating off me like heat from a furnace. Not just grief for Leah, but grief for the son I thought I'd raised, the family I thought we'd built together. Donna stopped by that evening with soup and the kind of direct honesty that only sisters can deliver. She took one look at me sitting at the kitchen table with my calculator and my stack of receipts and said, "Boundaries, Mark. Grief is one thing. Being used is another." She drew a line on my legal pad between gift and obligation, her nurse's handwriting precise and unforgiving. Under gift, she wrote, "Love, support, helping with down payment." Under obligation, I added balloon clause, tax deductions they're claiming. My name on the note, 25 months of payments. The collapse was turning into clarity, like debris settling after an explosion. I could see the foundation now, and it was cracked all the way through. At 7:02 the next morning, I sent a text to Mr. Alvarez, our family attorney. "Need to talk about the mortgage, the trust letter, and my exposure. When can we meet?" I decided to stop paying before I told anybody I was done. November 21st, 9:30 a.m. First Great Lakes Bank, the branch near the river where the parking lot smells like coffee and wet leaves. I brought Priya Singh a large coffee, 2 creams, no sugar, because she'd been handling my accounts since Leah and I first opened our joint checking in 1995. Some relationships deserve the courtesy of caffeine. I set a manila folder labeled simply Blue Spruce on her desk, right next to the family photo where her twin boys grinned gap-toothed at the camera. "Priya, I need to understand my options," I said, sliding the mortgage documentation across her desk. "If I pause payment for one cycle while we review title obligations and my cosigner status, what exactly happens?" She reviewed the auto-debit setup, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd been translating financial pain into bureaucratic language for 20 years. Late notice goes out December 6th, she said carefully. Grace period extends to December 16th. 30-day notice on December 31st, if still unpaid. Credit hit goes to the primary borrower, that's Ethan. Your cosigner status protects you until actual default, which wouldn't happen until 90 days past due. Legal, clean, surgical. And if I wanted to add a fraud watch to the account, something to flag any withdrawals over $5,000. Standard protection measure, she nodded. Especially for cosigners who want visibility into equity access. At 10:12 a.m., I signed a temporary suspension of auto debit form and a fraud monitoring request. The bank slip she printed looked innocuous, just numbers and codes, but it felt like a declaration of independence. I texted Donna a photo of the slip without comment. Sometimes the most powerful statements need no words. That afternoon, I called Nate Morrison, a licensed private investigator I'd met through Jimmy Rodriguez at the VFW. Nate specialized in asset verification, the kind of work that divorce attorneys and business partners needed when the books didn't balance. I need to know if any equity has been pulled from a property without my knowledge since September, I told him. Everything legal, everything documented. I'm not looking for dirt, I'm looking for facts. His quote was $1,100. I transferred it before we hung up. Sometimes clarity is worth every penny. After lunch I drove past Blue Spruce Lane, timing my approach with the garbage pickup. Their recycling bin sat at the curb like a confession booth, and there, nestled between wine bottles and Amazon boxes, was a catering flyer. Holiday dinner service for December 24th. Deposit paid $1,200. 18 seats, not 19. My absence wasn't an oversight, it was intentional. I circled catering and deposit on my notepad, right next to 18 seats. If they wanted to stage a performance at Christmas, I'd make sure they had the right audience, one that included the truth. That evening I sat in my workshop with Leah's old recipe box, running my fingers over her careful handwriting. Pecan pie, Ethan's favorite, one card read. Always make extra. He takes seconds. The boy who used to sneak pecans from the bowl was planning a Christmas feast without the man who'd taught him to crack the shells. The plan was forming like a blueprint in my mind, each step as methodical as framing a house. Foundation first, then structure, then the finish work that makes everything look intentional. Revenge starts like a renovation. Demo, what's rotten. Shore up what matters. November 24th, the day after Thanksgiving, I sat across from Mr. Alvarez in his office that smelled like leather and old coffee. He'd been our attorney since 1999, when Leah and I bought our first house, and he read people the way contractors read blueprints, looking for weak points that would cause problems later. He pulled Leah's letter of intent from his files, the one dated April 12, 2021, just 3 months before she passed. Her handwriting was already shaky from the treatments, but her words were clear. Our support for Ethan's housing shall never replace our right to respect or access to our family. It's not legally binding, Mark, he said, adjusting his glasses, but juries and judges read hearts too, and this shows intent, that your financial support was conditional on maintaining family relationships. We drafted a plan as methodical as any construction project. First, formalize the December payment pause. Second, file a notice of contribution and reimbursement claim to protect my advances, a legal document that would create a paper trail of every dollar I'd invested. Third, send a cordial letter requesting access to tax documentation for the property since 2022, since I'd been subsidizing their mortgage interest deductions. Fourth, offer to pay the HOA assessment directly in exchange for board meeting minutes. Public record, but asking was faster than filing requests. We're not trying to destroy anything, Mr. Alvarez explained. We're creating accountability. If they want your money, they need to acknowledge the source. November 27th, I hand-delivered a check for $3,200 to the HOA office. The property manager, an efficient woman named Carol, looked surprised. Usually the homeowners handle this directly. I'm protecting my investment, I said simply. I'd like copies of any board discussions about this assessment, if that's possible. As I walked back to my truck, Mrs. Romano flagged me down from her garden. She was 70-something, with the sharp eyes of someone who'd survived the Depression, and 2 husbands. They're moving the dining table to the front room, she whispered, pulling off her gardening gloves. 18 chairs, I counted when the delivery truck came. She scribbled December 24th on a post-it from her pocket address book and handed it to me. Proof wrapped in neighborhood gossip, the most reliable intelligence network in suburbia. November 29th, the Friday after Thanksgiving. Nate returned my call with an affidavit that made my coffee taste like acid. Ethan had opened a $15,000 line of credit in October, using the property as collateral. The funds had been paid to Kelsey Staging LLC, a company I recognized because I'd built display walls for their model homes last spring. I forwarded the affidavit to Mr. Alvarez with a simple note. The leak is bigger than we thought. December 1st arrived like Judgment Day. At 8 a.m. my auto debit didn't process. The silence was louder than any argument I'd ever had with Ethan. At 3:17 p.m. he texted me a meme about boomers and boundaries, some cartoon showing an older man being pushed away by younger hands. I replied with a thumbs up emoji. Sometimes the most devastating responses are the ones that refuse to engage. That evening, I sat in my living room with the photo Donna had helped me frame, Ethan at 5 years old, standing on a kitchen chair to help Leah roll out pie dough, his face serious with concentration. The boy in that picture would have saved me a seat at any table. The man he'd become had calculated me out of his holiday like an unnecessary expense. December 3rd, Mr. Alvarez filed the reimbursement notice with the county clerk and sent a certified letter to Ethan and Kelsey, requesting a meeting to clarify ongoing financial obligations and family expectations. The language was gentle but unmistakable. Either we talk or lawyers talk for us. My seat at their table might have been eliminated, but I was about to make sure the conversation included a chair they couldn't control. If they won't open the door, I'll walk in through the ledger. December 4th through 7th, I assembled what I called my December binder, a contractor's approach to documentation. Front pocket, Priya's bank slip showing the payment suspension. Tab sections, taxes, HOA, title, loans, messages. Each piece of evidence filed with the precision I'd learned from 30 years of managing construction projects, where one missing permit could shut down an entire job site. In the photo section, I included a picture from September 14th, Ethan hugging me on Blue Spruce's front porch, after the appraisal came in higher than expected. Thanks, Dad. We won't forget this, he'd said, his arm around my shoulder, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. December 6th, the mortgage company's late notice arrived via email, addressed to Ethan with me copied as the co-signer. Payment of $2,847 missed on December 1st. Grace period extends to December 16, 2024. I printed it and underlined grace period in red ink. Some gifts come with expiration dates. That evening, downtown Naperville glowed with the Winter Lights Parade. I stood in the crowd on Main Street, hands buried in my coat pockets, watching families sway under strings of December bulbs like ornaments themselves. Across the street, I spotted Ethan and Kelsey with Valerie, all three wearing matching navy coats and red scarves like they'd been styled for a Christmas card. Ethan caught my eye for a moment, just long enough for recognition to flicker across his face, then looked away. The gap between us was exactly the width of Main Street, but it felt like the distance between who he used to be and who he'd become. December 7th, I stopped by a holiday open house Kelsey was hosting on Elm Street. She was in full realtor mode, her voice carrying that bright professional tone as she guided couples through staged rooms that smelled like cinnamon and fresh paint. We're doing our big family thing Christmas Eve, I heard her tell a young couple admiring the kitchen island. 19 seats, well, 18 now. Family dynamics, you know how it is. 19 seats that became 18. My subtraction was so casual, so practiced, that I wondered how long they'd been rehearsing my absence. I slipped into the dining room where she'd left a clipboard with seating charts and catering notes. 18 name cards were arranged in careful script, with one blank card at the bottom where Dad had been penciled in and later crossed out with 2 decisive lines. I took a photo as she stepped away to fluff throw pillows, not hiding but not announcing myself either. Just a father who could read the writing on the wall, and the crossed-out writing on the seating chart. Before leaving, I placed $100 donation in the collection box at St. Raphael Serai, writing "Make room" on the memo line. Sometimes prayers need to be specific about the miracle you're requesting. December 9th and 10th. I prepared the final piece of my plan, a way to invite truth to dinner without waiting for an invitation. Because the most powerful confrontations happen when people think they're safe, when they're surrounded by their carefully constructed narrative, and suddenly realize that the foundation was never as solid as they thought. The truth doesn't need a seat. It brings its own chair. December 11th. I sent Ethan a text that was casual enough to seem innocent. Stopping by with a gift on December 15th. Won't stay long. His response came after 20 minutes of typing indicators "we're busy that day." Then, after another pause, "maybe leave it on the porch?" Leave it on the porch. Like I was a delivery driver dropping off a package, instead of his father bringing a Christmas gift. I brought it anyway. December 15th. I rang their doorbell with a wrapped frame tucked under my arm. When no one answered, I left it on their front steps with a note written on the back of one of my business cards. "Leave the oven light on, Dad." Inside the frame was a photo of 5-year-old Ethan, flour dusting his cheeks, standing on a kitchen stool to help Leah cut out gingerbread men. His concentration was absolute, his tongue poking out slightly as he pressed the cookie cutter into the dough. It was taken in December 1999, back when Christmas meant something different to all of us. December 12th. Priya called with an update that sounded routine but felt like poetry. "Heads up, Mark. The bank is sending out a routine verification letter on December 14th. Nothing dramatic, just standard procedure for accounts under review." Music to my carefully orchestrated plan. December 14th. The title company's email arrived in my inbox. A forwarded message from November 7th that I'd requested through proper channels. Ethan had contacted them about removing future contribution acknowledgments from the property records, essentially trying to erase any documentation of my ongoing financial support. I printed the email and highlighted the key phrase, "Request to modify cosigner notification protocols." He'd been trying to make my payments invisible, to continue benefiting from my support while eliminating any record that it existed. December 15th. I attended early morning mass, then drove to Donna's house with coffee and the kind of news that requires caffeine. She handed me a manila envelope before I could even sit down. "I ran into Kelsey at Target yesterday," she said. She was on the phone with her mother, speaker on, complaining about some mortgage mess. I wrote down exactly what she said. Let him feel it. Maybe then he'll understand boundaries. Let him feel it. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculation, not just excluding me from Christmas, but wanting me to suffer for the privilege of paying their bills. December 16th, 4:05 p.m. The grace period officially ended. Ethan's text arrived like clockwork. "Bank called about the mortgage. Did your card expire or something?" I stared at the message for a long time, this attempt to frame my deliberate action as an accident. His willingness to believe that his father was simply too incompetent to maintain his own banking. "No," I replied. "We need to talk." His response was a thumbs down emoji. Not words, just a symbol of rejection, as casual as declining a friend request. December 18th. I was walking my usual route around the neighborhood when I spotted a catering van parked in front of 1247 Blue Spruce. Perfect timing. Sometimes the universe aligns to support your plans. I approached the driver, a young man loading warming trays, and handed him a $20 tip. "Make sure there's an extra chair," I said with a smile. "You never know who might show up." He laughed, pocketing the bill. "Sure thing, sir. Always good to be prepared." Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of their dining room transformation. The table had been extended to its full length, covered with Kelsey's grandmother's lace tablecloth. 18 chairs surrounded it like a fortress, with one empty chair sitting at the far end like a challenge. That chair wasn't accidental. It was a statement, a physical representation of the space where I used to belong, now deliberately vacant and on display for everyone to see. December 20th through 23rd, the fuse I'd been laying for weeks finally reached the dynamite. I scheduled a 9 a.m. meeting with Mr. Alvarez for December 24th. Christmas Eve morning, and prepared my final gift for the family that had forgotten to save me a seat. The truth, wrapped in legal documents and tied with a ribbon of accountability. I showed up with a casserole dish and a bank letter. December 24th, 9 a.m. Mr. Alvarez and I sat in his office reviewing the packet that would change everything. Bank suspension notice, reimbursement claim, Nate's affidavit about the secret line of credit, HOA receipt showing my payment, and the title company email revealing Ethan's attempt to hide my contributions. "You're not humiliating anyone, Mark," he said, organizing the documents into a red folder. "You're disclosing facts. State your position clearly. Offer a remedy. Refinance by March with restored family access, or you'll petition the court for full reimbursement. And if they refuse? Then they refuse publicly in front of 18 witnesses while sitting in a house you've been financing." He smiled grimly. "Sometimes the best courtroom is a dining room." At 5:52 p.m., snow began falling like confetti outside 1247 Blue Spruce Lane. I parked across the street, engine running, watching warm light spill from their windows while I gathered my courage. In the passenger seat sat a foil-covered lasagna, Leah's recipe, the one I'd memorized from her careful handwriting, and a red envelope addressed simply to family. I rang the doorbell. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, replaced by the kind of silence that means someone unwanted has arrived. Valerie opened the door, her face shifting from holiday cheer to barely concealed irritation in the time it took her to recognize me. "We're in the middle of—" "I know," I said, stepping across the threshold with the lasagna balanced in one hand. "I'm not expecting a plate." Ethan appeared behind her, his face flushed from wine and whatever conversation I'd interrupted. "Dad, we said we weren't—" "I'm here to fix a leak," I said simply, walking past them both to set the lasagna on the sideboard. 18 faces watched from the extended table, Kelsey's family, some neighbors I recognized, a few couples I didn't. The empty chair at the far end sat like an accusation. I placed the red envelope at the head of the table, right next to Valerie's wine glass. "This is my last gift to the family." The room held its breath as I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the bank letter. "Payment paused in December for account verification," I announced, my voice carrying the same tone I used when explaining construction delays to impatient clients. Calm, professional, factual. I laid Nate's affidavit beside it like I was dealing cards. Equity line of credit opened in October, $15,000 transferred to Kelsey Staging LLC. A fork clinked against china somewhere in the room, high and sharp. "I co-signed this mortgage and paid every month for 2 years to help build this home," I continued, speaking to the room but looking at Ethan. "My late wife's legacy invested in what we thought was our shared future. You told me there wasn't room at this table, so I made room for the truth." Ethan's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. Kelsey's face had gone white, except for 2 spots of red high on her cheeks. The catered dinner was getting cold while 18 witnesses processed what they were hearing. "You can't just—" Kelsey started. "I can," I said, meeting her eyes. "Legally." And I did. I turned back to Ethan. And for a moment I saw the 5-year-old boy from the photograph, flour on his cheeks, asking me to help him reach the cookie cutters. "Refinance by March 1st. Restore family access. Apologize for calculating me out of Christmas like an unnecessary expense. Do those 3 things and we can sit at a table again, or I stop paying forever and file for full reimbursement of my contribution." The silence stretched like a taut wire until Valerie's voice cut through it, sharp with panic. "We counted on your payment for at least 6 more months. The refinance won't close until—" She stopped, realizing what she'd admitted. The room froze. 18 witnesses had just heard her confirm that my exclusion from Christmas was calculated around my continued financial contribution. They wanted my money but not my presence. A ATM with an inconvenient emotional attachment to the family it was supporting. I looked around the table one more time, at faces I recognized and faces I didn't, at the feast they'd prepared with money I'd provided while planning a celebration that didn't include me. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, pulling Leah's recipe card from my pocket and placing it beside the lasagna. "The recipe's on the house." I walked out into the December snow, leaving behind the envelope, the evidence, and the empty chair that would never look the same to anyone who'd witnessed what just happened. The morning after, the house rang like a bell I'd finally struck. December 25th, 8:03 a.m. My phone buzzed with a trilogy of texts. Ethan. We need to talk. Kelsey, you ambushed us in front of everyone. Valerie, no words, just a photo of my red envelope still sitting unopened on their dining room table, like evidence of a crime scene. At 9:15 a.m., a robocall from First Great Lakes Bank reached Ethan's phone. I knew because he called me 30 minutes later, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was 12 and had broken Mrs. Chen's window with a baseball. Dad, can you just make the December payment and we'll figure everything else out? I already made December, I said, watching snow accumulate on my windowsill. I made the truth. The silence stretched until he hung up. December 26th. Nate delivered his final report, a notarized affidavit documenting every financial transaction tied to 1247 Blue Spruce Lane since September 2022. 27 pages of bank records, wire transfers, auto debits, and loan applications that painted a picture of systematic financial dependency disguised as independence. Mr. Alvarez filed a formal petition that afternoon, not to foreclose, that would be cruelty, but to clarify obligations and protect my contributions. We included Leah's letter of intent as Exhibit A, not as binding law but as evidence of the heart behind the money. Boundaries, he explained, not punishment. We're teaching accountability, not seeking revenge. The neighborhood started talking. Mrs. Romano left a tin of her Christmas biscotti on my porch with a note written in her careful script. You taught him to build houses. Now you're teaching him to stand up. Sometimes wisdom comes in unexpected packages. Kelsey posted a vague Instagram story about toxic family dynamics and financial manipulation, carefully crafted words that said everything while admitting nothing. Donna screenshotted it and texted it to me with one word: silence. She was right. I'd said what needed saying. Now the paperwork would speak for itself. December 28th, the mortgage company sent another email. This one addressed to both parties, account under review. January payment of $2,847 required by January 16th to avoid 30-day delinquency notice. I printed it, underlined required, and filed it behind Priya's bank slip. The math was becoming unavoidable, and mathematics doesn't negotiate or make excuses or send Instagram stories. Numbers simply exist, demanding acknowledgement. That evening, I found myself standing in the same aisle at Mariano's where this had all started, staring at the frozen desserts like they might contain answers. A young father passed by with his son perched in the shopping cart, the boy chattering about Christmas cookies and whether Santa would come again next year. The innocence in that voice made my chest ache. Once upon a time, Ethan had asked those same questions, had believed in the magic of tables set for family and doors that stayed open for the people who loved you. December 27th, 3 p.m., we gathered at Mr. Alvarez's office, me, Ethan, and Kelsey. The room smelled like coffee and wet wool from our coats, and the December light coming through the windows was thin and gray. I brought Leah's recipe card, not for the meeting, but as a reminder that some things are measured in love, not just money. Justice is a level table and a clean contract. Mr. Alvarez spread the proposed memorandum of understanding across his conference table like he was laying out blueprints for a house we were all going to have to live in. No one is foreclosing on Christmas, he began, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd negotiated his way through 30 years of family disputes. We're drawing lines that should have been drawn a long time ago. The document was surprisingly simple. 3 pages that boiled down to basic accountability. Ethan would refinance the mortgage by March 1st, 2025, removing my name from the note upon proof of approval. I would step back from the financial obligation once he demonstrated he could carry it himself. The $18,500 I'd advanced would be repaid in installments starting June 1st. Not a punishment, but recognition that gifts and loans are different creatures entirely. The monthly mortgage payments I'd been making would be acknowledged in writing, creating a paper trail for tax purposes, and more importantly, for truth. And then there was the clause that mattered most. Though it was the hardest to enforce, family access shall be reasonable and mutual, with holiday invitations extended in good faith, not legally binding like the money terms, but sitting there on the page like a candle in a window, a statement of intention, a commitment to try again. Kelsey bristled. We don't need conditions to see family. Mr. Alvarez folded his hands and looked at her with the patience of someone who'd heard every variation of denial that people could construct around their behavior. You need his signature to refinance. The mortgage company requires all co-signers to consent to removal. He needs assurance that stepping back financially doesn't mean being cut out personally. He pointed to Nate's affidavit, still sitting in its manila folder like evidence in a trial. A court would ask uncomfortable questions about that October line of credit. Was Mr. Holloway notified? Did he consent? If not, why not? Ethan exhaled slowly, and for the first time in months, I saw something that looked like the sun I'd raised. I messed up, he said quietly. I got caught up in, he gestured vaguely at nothing. Kelsey's family, the house, trying to prove we didn't need help. I forgot that family isn't about proving anything. He looked at the HOA receipt, the one showing my payment of $3,200. I'll take this over too. All of it. I should have been handling my own responsibilities. In the holidays, Mr. Alvarez asked gently. Ethan's voice was barely audible. There should have been 19 chairs. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying since that phone call in the grocery store. I'll make the January payment on the 10th, I said. If you sign this today and send me confirmation of your refinance application by January 5th, February is on you. He nodded. Kelsey stared out the window at the December snow, her reflection ghostly in the glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful and measured. I wanted to prove we could do it ourselves. You can, I said. But wanting to prove independence and actually achieving it are different things. One is about pride. The other is about responsibility. We signed with pens that scratched like small animals across the paper. Ethan's signature was shaky, Kelsey's precise and controlled, mine steady with the relief of a man who'd finally said what needed saying. Walking out into the thin December sunlight, I texted Donna. We wrote a new table. Her response came immediately. With the right number of chairs? We'll see, I typed back. But at least we know how many people are supposed to be sitting in them. Revenge without reflection is demolition without blueprints. December 28th through 31st. I returned to my workshop with the kind of purpose I hadn't felt since Leah died. I pulled out the maple plank I'd been saving for a table leaf, an extension piece I'd never finished after she passed, because cooking for one didn't require extra space. Now it felt like prophecy. Sometimes you have to build room for the future you hope to create. I sanded the wood with meditative strokes, each pass of the paper smoothing away imperfections, while Leia's recipe card sat under a magnet on my bandsaw, her careful handwriting a reminder that the most important measurements in life can't be calculated with rulers. January 5th. Arrived with Ethan's text. A screenshot of his 9 a.m. appointment with a refinance officer at Great Lakes Credit Union, along with a photo of paperwork spread across his kitchen table, the same kitchen table where we used to work on his homework 20 years ago. Another text followed an hour later, a picture of my empty lasagna pan, washed and ready to be returned, with a yellow post-it stuck to the bottom. It was good, Mom's recipe always is. Not an apology. Not yet. But acknowledgement, the first step toward rebuilding something that had been torn down. December 30th. I walked the Riverwalk where Leah and I used to bring 5-year-old Ethan to feed the ducks. The geese traced lines across the water like signatures on a contract with winter, and I thought about the difference between love and enabling, between supporting someone and carrying them. Revenge, I realized, hadn't been about breaking him. It had been about stopping the bleeding, his and mine. Boundaries disguised as justice. Accountability wrapped in consequences. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. I slipped Leah's letter of intent into a new frame that evening, reading her words with fresh understanding. Our support shall never replace our right to respect or access to family. She'd known, even in her final months, that generosity without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction disguised as virtue. New Year's Eve, I lit a candle at St. Raphael's and whispered to the empty sanctuary, "For the table we're going to build together." The candle flame flickered but held steady, like hope learning to trust itself again. At home, I poured 2 fingers of Jameson, Leah's favorite, and clinked the glass against her photograph on the mantel. We made room, I said aloud to her smile. Finally made room for the truth. The year ended with a simple email from the bank. Account verification complete. Status updated. Dry bureaucratic language that meant everything had changed and nothing would ever be quite the same. January stretched ahead like a blueprint waiting for construction, full of possibilities and payoffs still to be determined. January brings receipts or excuses, and I was about to find out which one my son preferred. January 5th, 2025, 11:09 a.m. Ethan's email arrived with military precision, confirmation of his refinance application, complete with loan officer contact information, and a timeline showing approval expected by February 20th. I replied with my own receipt. $2,847 processed on January 10th, exactly as promised, accompanied by a single line, last one. The finality of those 2 words felt like the last nail in a project that had taken too long to complete. January 12th. My phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Kelsey. We're doing a small Sunday dinner next week. Wanna come? I stared at the screen for a full minute, reading subtext and searching for catch. After everything that had happened, after all the calculations and exclusions, she was extending an invitation. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on yes. I'll bring the bread. Sunday dinner at 12:47, Blue Spruce felt like visiting a construction site after the workers have cleaned up, familiar but fundamentally changed. There was an extra chair set at the table without ceremony. No big announcement or awkward explanations. Just space that acknowledged I belonged there. Ethan spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of words he'd been practicing. I'm sorry, Dad, for Christmas, for the way we handled everything. For forgetting that you're not just a co-signer on the mortgage, you're family. The apology wasn't perfect, wasn't accompanied by dramatic music or tears, but it had the solid feel of something built to last. I nodded, accepting it the way contractors accept completed work, evaluating the craftsmanship, checking the foundation, determining whether it would hold up under pressure. We'll see how it looks in March, I said, and I meant it kindly. Valerie was present but distant. Like a house guest who knows she's overstayed her welcome. That was fine. Her distance wasn't my problem to solve, wasn't a relationship I needed to repair. Some boundaries work in both directions. January 16th, the first test arrived. The mortgage auto debit failed as scheduled, and Ethan's manual payment receipt showed up in my email at 3:02 p.m., on time. His responsibility. My chest unclenched for the first time in months. Nate closed his investigation file with a final report that would serve as evidence if we ever needed it. Mr. Alvarez updated his records and sent me a summary that read like poetry. Matter resolved through communication and accountability. The HOA newsletter listed the special assessment as paid in full, a small bureaucratic victory that felt larger than it should have. Mrs. Romano waved from her garden when I drove past, giving me a thumbs up that said she'd been keeping track of the neighborhood drama and approved of the outcome. February arrived with steady progress reports. Refinance application approved, inspection scheduled, closing date set for February 28th. Each email from Ethan felt like a construction update from a job site where everyone finally knew their role and was doing their work. March 1st sat on the horizon like a deadline that would determine whether we'd built something that could last, or if we were just postponing another collapse. Either way, I'd done my part. The rest was up to them. The last laugh in revenge is a quiet dinner where nobody needs to speak loudly. March 4th, 2025. The closing disclosure arrived in my email like a graduation certificate. Refinance complete. My name officially removed. Wire transfer scheduled for my $18,500, with the first installment due June 1st as agreed. A yellow post-it was stuck to the scanned document. Ethan's handwriting careful and clear. Thank you for making me stand up. We met that afternoon at Rosie's Diner on Ogden Avenue, the same place where I'd taken him for pancakes after his Little League games 20 years ago. The booth still had the same cracked vinyl, the same laminated menus that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. He slid a small wooden box across the formica table, his fingers nervously adjusting the salt shaker. Inside, nested in tissue paper, was Leah's gingerbread man cookie cutter, the one from the photograph I'd left on their porch, polished to a shine that reflected the diner's fluorescent lights. Mom would have told me to stop being stupid a lot sooner, he said, his smile rueful and real. She never let pride get in the way of common sense. I picked up the cookie cutter, feeling the worn edges where Leah's hands had gripped it through dozens of Christmas seasons. She did tell you, I said gently. Through me, you just weren't ready to hear it yet. And now? Now you've got your own mortgage payment to make every month. Amazing how that focuses the mind on what's actually important. We ordered coffee and pie, pecan for him, apple for me, and talked about ordinary things. His job, my latest renovation project, the Cubs' chances for the upcoming season. Normal father and son conversation in a normal diner on a normal Tuesday afternoon, which felt like the most extraordinary miracle of all. Walking out into the sharp March air, I realized that the house on Blue Spruce Lane wasn't my retirement anymore. It was their responsibility, their risk, their achievement, if they could make it work. My retirement was something different now. My dignity intact, my boundaries clear, my ledger honest. Because here's the moral that took me 60 years to learn. You didn't lose me, you gave me away, and I walked back to myself. Revenge wasn't spite dressed up as justice. It was love tough enough to say no, boundaries strong enough to hold weight, and the radical act of refusing to enable someone else's worst impulses just because you share their DNA. The truth had made room at the table, after all. Not by force, not through manipulation, but by the simple act of showing up with receipts, and refusing to pretend that love without respect is anything more than expensive enabling. I drove home through Naperville's tree-lined streets, past houses where other families were probably struggling with their own versions of the same story, the delicate balance between supporting the people you love and teaching them to support themselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Donna. How did it go? Like building a house, I typed back. Foundation first, then the structure, then you see if it's strong enough to weather the storms. And, ask me in 10 years, but the foundation feels solid. That evening I sat in my workshop with Leah's recipe box, planning the meals I'd cook for the holidays that stretched ahead of us, holidays where the guest list would be honest, where the chairs would be set for people who actually wanted to be there, where the table would be long enough for everyone who deserved a seat. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to participate in your own diminishment. Sometimes justice looks like a signed contract and a payment made on time. Sometimes love means teaching someone that actions have consequences, even when, especially when, those consequences hurt. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very patient, revenge transforms into something better. A family that finally learned to build a table strong enough to hold the weight of truth.